Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're watching this from. Welcome back to Game for Thought, a live stream hosted by us here at Hoest Digital Arts and Entertainment, located in Kortrijk, Belgium. My name is Ali Weiss, and I am the ethics coordinator in international game development here at Hoest Digital Arts and Entertainment, which we commonly like to call DIE. And I'm thrilled to bring you yet another Game for Thought stream, and the last one of the year. This is the last stream of 2023, and we are really ending it with a bang. So I'm thrilled to bring you tonight's discussion. And what topic are we talking about, you might ask? This month, we're covering the topic of games for good. Games beyond entertainment. So we'll be diving into the world of serious games, applied games, and so on. And if you're asking yourself, what is a serious game? What is an applied game? Don't you worry, we're going to get to that with our lovely panelists in just a few minutes. If you have joined a Game for Thought stream before, welcome back. I am so excited to have you back here on Twitch, joining us virtually from somewhere in this world. If you are a new viewer, if this is the first time you've ever seen Game for Thought, you are so welcome. This is a live stream from our university here in Belgium that we do every month about a different ethically relevant topic in the games and digital entertainment industry. So we realized in 2021 that in an industry, in a curriculum that is so highly technical, that we really wanted to create space to discuss the more socially relevant, ethically relevant implications of games and digital technologies as well. And so with that, the Game for Thought live stream was born. We've tackled topics like accessibility in games, dark design patterns, mental health in digital entertainment was last month's topic, violence in games, sustainability, and so on. This video will also be uploaded to YouTube afterwards, so if you want to watch it again, if you have to tune out at some point, no worries. We're going to upload this on the Hoest DAE YouTube as well. Without further ado, I'd love to introduce our panelists tonight. Joining us yet again, another international panel, joining us across 3 different continents. A star-studded panel. Really happy to have them on board. Firstly, we have Dr. Sabiha Ghellal. Sabiha is a professor of experience and game design at Stuttgart Media University, located in Germany. We also have Gillis. Glenn is the CEO of Sea Monster Entertainment, located all the way in South Africa, and he's also the chairperson of Games for Change Africa. We also have joining us from the United States, Elizabeth Newbury. Elizabeth is the director of the Wilson Center Serious Games Institute that is located in Washington, D.C. And last but not least, joining us actually today from Italy, but he's joining us originally from the United States, Eric Zimmerman. And Eric is a game designer and arts professor at the New York University Games Center in the U.S. Just a little bit of information about how the stream works. We will bring the panelists on board, and for the first 50 minutes or so, we will tackle the pre-submitted questions that we got from you all, from students watching, from members of our community. And then for the last 15, 20 minutes or so of the stream, we'll open it up for an audience Q&A. Just be aware that you can ask a question during any moment of the stream this evening. Be sure to put a capital Q before your question when you ask it in the chat, just so we're sure that it's a question, and we can add it to our list that we will get back to a bit later on this evening. We ask you just to keep it respectful and mature in the chat as always, and we're really excited to have this conversation here with you all. So we're going to bring the panelists on board. Hang tight, and we'll see you in just a second. All right, welcome back, everyone. Very excited again to bring this panel for this evening talking about games for good beyond entertainment. We have joining us Eric Zimmerman. Eric, if we could just give a wave. Awesome. We have Glenn Gillis. A wave. Awesome. Elizabeth Newbury. Elizabeth, hello. And we have Sabiha. Ghellal, welcome, welcome. We're gonna go. You all do a much better job at introducing yourselves than I could ever do. So maybe it would be great if we could go one by one. Just share with the audience who you are, where you're working, and just briefly what got you into the world of serious games, of applied games. Eric, I see you first. I'm so sorry to put you on the spot, Eric.
That's okay. That
Hello.
that's my. I'm very comfortable being put on the spot. I'm Eric Zimmerman. Really happy to be here. I'm a game designer, and I've worked in the industry for about 30 years, mostly in video games, but I've also done tabletop games. And with architect Natalie Pozzi, she and I do large-scale museum installations as well. On the academic side, I've taught game design for a long time, and I'm currently a full-time professor at the NYU Game Center in New York City. Although right now I'm in Italy on sabbatical, so happy to be in a closer time zone, I guess, to Belgium. In terms of serious games, I guess I see myself as a game designer that I'm kind of a cheap date. I work across all kinds of different ways of understanding what games are. Sometimes a little bit more in the art world, sometimes more in the commercial industry. My studio that I ran with Peter Lee was doing commercial entertainment games. But I also am very interested in the intersection of games and learning. I started a nonprofit many years ago. I helped start a nonprofit called the Institute of Play that designed whole schools where games and play were the model for the curriculum. As an educator at the university level, I write a lot about teaching games and game design. I think games have a lot to teach other disciplines and forms of learning. And I'm very fascinated by the idea of doing games as cultural impact. So I guess I would say a lot of the themes of doing games, not just for entertainment, weave themselves through different aspects of how I see myself as a designer and also as an educator.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Eric. I am honored to have you on this panel. So thank you for making the time for us. And it's super convenient and great that you're in a close time zone over in Italy. So
Totally.
thank you, Eric. Next up, I see Glenn. Hello.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity. My name is Glenn Gillis. My day job is the CEO of Sea Monster. We're the leading impact gaming company in Africa. We've been around for 12 and a half years. So coming up to being a teenager, and it really feels that way after the year that we've had in the world, and running a company in the creative industries is never straightforward. I kind of fell into the industry a bit by mistake. I'm not a frustrated game designer or creative. I just fundamentally believe in the power of a story to shape the world. And I'm really excited about just everybody coming to the realization that, stories are how we make sense of the world, and how that new narrative that we're telling ourselves as humans, and that certainly that Africa is taking to the world. And so really, I ran a big animation company that was making animated content for Disney. They're going to be big in animation. Let's watch this space. But yeah, out of that business, we restructured that. We brought that industrial scale storytelling and creative process, and we've made over 120 AR, VR, and app-based games, some web-based stuff. We tend to work with large corporate clients. The grant-making side of things in Africa is extremely limited. We don't have access to a lot of that traditional game-based learning funding and stuff. We've done some stuff in the marketing space. Very, very interested in how brands and their purpose can be used to start to create authentic gaming experiences, usually around the knowledge that is trapped in their business. So we can talk more about that later. But really, the reach and scale that brands bring, I think, are going to be a fundamental trend over the next 5 or 8 years in the impact gaming space. In addition, obviously, to the stuff that Eric and everybody else does, including ourselves. Between 2 and 4 in the morning, when I got nothing to do, we started Games to Change Africa. So you might know the Games to Change organization, which was 20 years old this year. And I was in New York to sign the MOU with the United Nations around how we can use games in tracking the Sustainable Development Goals. It is a crisis, and I think games are really a critical part of the solution there. And so we just had our festival, our third festival in Cape Town. It was amazing, and yeah, we had
Some
so much
claps in the
fun.
chat
And
for that.
yeah, it was all really good. So that's me in a nutshell. Games are going to change the world. So.
Closing. Thank you so much, Glenn. It's funny that you say that you, I didn't know that you accidentally ended up in the game space. It's funny, I also very much ended up in this space. My background is in psychology and philosophy personally, but there's just so many overlaps between these more socially interesting themes and topics and games and the digital space. So
Get a proper job. Get a proper job, they said. Nah, who wants to do that?
we'll find one. We'll invent it.
Why
Thank
start
you
now?
so much, Glenn. Awesome. Sabiha, hello, with a super cool background. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. This is really exciting. So my name is Sabiha Ghellal, and I'm a professor for experience in game design at Stuttgart Media University. So that's a University of Applied Science. I have a background more in the area of experience design, and I moved into games when I started working for Sony Europe. I worked there for 10 years researching mixed reality and mobile games. Started off in a very interesting EU-funded research project that got me really early into mixed reality games. It was called Integrated Project on Pervasive Gaming, where we looked at pervasive gaming and used some mixed reality elements within the gameplay. Serious games I started to look into when I used to be the curator of the animation festival in Stuttgart for the Game Zone. So I've done that for 10 years. And then a number of museums approached me and asked me if I could help them to find digital paths into the museums. So I worked on two research projects. One was with a natural history museum and one was with an art gallery to see how we could maybe design games to get a different target group to visit those museums again, and also to maybe change the understanding of museums a little bit. It was very easy for the Natural History Museum. It was a little bit less easy for the state-owned art museum, but it was a lot of fun. And I think it's a nice challenge to have, to really think about how much game should be in it. Like from my perspective, it should be a game, right? And for the Natural History Museum, it was easier because the game artist would have to make sure that everything is correct. So that game artists looked at a lot of bugs and animals to make sure that they're anatomically correct and that they behave in the right way and that they move in the right way, right? So I think serious games should be factual. And that makes them complex and fun and interdisciplinary challenge that I enjoy working in very much. But I also enjoy other type of games. So for me, the distinction is not very important. I think any kind of game could be could be applied for a serious reason.
Wonderful. I think, Sabiha, that will eventually segue us perfectly into our first question. Great to have you on board. Very welcome here, Sabiha. Last but not least, Elizabeth. Hello.
Hello, I'm calling from DC, so very excited to be here. My name is Liz Newbury. I'm the director of the Serious Games Initiative at the Wilson Center, which is a congressionally founded nonpartisan think tank in DC. My pronouns are she, her, and to answer your question of how I got into serious games, one might argue it's because I grew up with three brothers. We were very competitive around video games. Anything they could do, I could do better. And so I decided to go into professionally research and dive into games that way. But maybe it's also, you could map it to when I first played Oregon Trail or Carmen Sandiego, trying to figure out geography through video games. But I would say largely it's because I've now leading a 20-year-old initiative on serious games who came up with the definition of serious games back in the day, and at least applied for the digital sphere. And really excited to see how games can be used, how they can be developed for public education around policy initiatives. That's where more or less our focus. I bring a research lens into it, so understanding the broader landscape of serious games and how they can be useful, how they can really motivate learning, how they can increase knowledge acquisition. But also, one of the hats I wear is I'm chair of what's called the Federal Games Guild, which is a group of about 100 govies in DC who are excited and interested in how games can be used. So that's some of the ways that I connect with serious games. And I'm really excited to be here for this panel and discussion.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Liz. Happy to have you here. Yeah, so you four, you come from very different backgrounds with different experiences in the world of games and digital media. Maybe serious games also slightly mean something different for everyone. And so before we jump into this discussion any further, when even I was talking about this stream with all of my students, I teach first year students here at DIE. Some students came to me and they were like, Allie, what do you mean by a serious game? Is it a game that is serious, or what is a serious game? So let us define what exactly the characteristics of a game that a serious game has, and what basically differentiates it from a game that is purely entertainment focused.
Yeah, I'll dive in first since name of the initiative.
Go right ahead.
So if we think about a serious game, you really defined it there with it's a game that's goes beyond entertainment. I would say it's an entertaining game because it's not a game if it's not fun, hopefully. But there's a couple of different ways that I conceptualize serious games. There's, first of all, games that are designed from the get-go to be some sort of positive force. So they're looking at education. Math Blasters back in my day was a big one. Now we have many more games out there that really incorporate educational practices and really try to make change central to the game design. So that's category one, designed from the get-go to be a serious or a voice of change. Number two is games that are used. Maybe they're commercial games. The original Minecraft is a great example of this. Minecraft originally was just a game that we were all flocking to and playing. And then educators especially saw that students were flocking and playing this game and trying to figure out how they could use it into the classroom. So more of like modding a commercial game or using a commercial game, for example, within the classroom, but just trying to use a commercial game out of the box, maybe as a second category. So it's a game that's being used for those sort of positive impacts. And now we also have this hybrid sort of space where commercial games are being either redesigned or incorporating this element of social positive change. One example, again, is Minecraft. They created the Minecraft Education Edition as part of a trajectory for more a serious play, as you will. But we also have game developers like EVE Online who have incorporated quests within their very commercial space that are helping with human research, COVID research recently, and other ways of really thinking outside the box that games can be used to not just entertain, but to help some way, either through supporting research, through supporting education, through supporting directly climate, other sorts of things that are within this broader climate of serious games. So I'll stop there because I know that other people probably have a different orientation to what serious games are.
Thank you so much for that very thorough three-piece definition of serious games. I think that was the perfect way to start us off. Already a lot of info for those of you watching. Wonderful, Liz. Thank you. Anyone else want to jump on the question of how do you define serious games?
Yeah, I'll just, I love that. And I think that's spot on. And since you coined the phrase serious games, it was only appropriate that you should have gone first in that. I'm not an academic, so I won't bring the same level of rigor to it. So just a couple of quick ones. all games have rules, and so there's always an element of learning that goes on in that game. And exactly like you say, how explicit is the entertainment element or the story element versus how explicit is that learning element? And so, if you imagine a matrix, then we can plot games that are, as you say, their context really sets the terms of what it is. But maybe just one last thought around that. Of course, we love games, all of us, I'm sure, because they are voluntary by their nature. And I just love that idea that people want to do something, and that all forms of entertainment, I guess, could be in that category. But when last did we really want to learn, and how much effort do we put into bringing that playfulness back into the learning experience? And that for me really sits at the heart of that impact element. And just always remembering that, yeah, if we can trigger a love of learning, for example, and link that through to behavior change, then we're impacting the world. And as you said, Liz, in for the better. I'll take that any day of the week.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Glenn. So we touched on already the experience of making this what is classified as a serious game, and it involves both the educational aspect, but also the fun. It was mentioned earlier. I think Liz, you said it. Hopefully, it's a game, and if fun is incorporated into it, otherwise maybe we can't define it as a game. I don't know. I think that can be its own argument in itself. But I want to ask here, since a lot of those who are watching are students here at DIE, for example, and they're getting ready to go into this game development space. What does the process of making a serious game or an applied game, what does that process look like? And how maybe can this look a bit different than the process of making a game that is purely entertainment focused? I know Eric, Sabiha, you've been very close in the game development space to the game making process in itself. So I'd love to hear from you.
If I may, first of all, I have a lot of publications I use from Eric to teach the student about game design and the idea of playfulness and rules and the definition, right? This is how it starts. So the students need to understand the theory. Like my lectures are always 3 parts. The first one is deconstructing a game. For that, I give them theory, for example, some of the theory from Eric. Then they take a game and they deconstruct it to understand it. The second part is then to produce a game design idea. And for a serious game, for example, I have 2 master students who right now create a strategy game, a turn-based strategy game. At the moment, it's still in its paper version, but it's going to be an elaborate PC game. The idea behind that is to teach about wetlands, because we've done some research about we done some research and we visited Letterkenny in Ireland. So the area of Donegal has used to have a lot of wetlands, and there was this expert that told us about wetlands and what the advantages are and what is happening right now and their implications on the environment. And so the parallel path is the idea of a strategy game, but then also to having to interview someone who really knows about the facts that need to be put into this game. So, for example, right now we are discussing if the students should take real weather data, so the weather as it is right now, to have an implication on the gameplay. What will that mean if they do that? So it's a question about getting to know the facts and making sure that you have them, and then think about how can I make them available in an interactive matter. And for me, it's absolutely crucial that this game is a game. If a game is not fun to play, you're taking away the very existing of the game. So it makes no sense to create a serious game that is no fun to play, if you ask me. Now, we can argue about what is fun, but it needs to be a game in order to work, because otherwise we take all its advantages away. But I think that's the second part. And then the third part is, because I'm also a scientist at heart, is the evaluation of the game. So teaching the students how to evaluate the game is always a player-centered design approach. And if you find out something new for master students, that's kind of like the question, right? That they need to produce a paper afterwards about their scientific results that they have found out. So 3 parts: deconstruct the game, design the game, and make sure that you put the expert information into it, and then evaluate the game. That would be my tip to your students.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Eric, I think you want to add something as well. Go right ahead.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear. I mean, it's a really interesting and complicated question that you're asking us about, serious games, not serious games, or educational intent, or entertainment intent, and what's the difference and how do we approach them? I mean, what I think is interesting is that all of us sort of are figuring out this question in slightly different ways. My orientation overlaps a lot with what's been said, but maybe I'll throw in like a slightly different angle too, which is that my training was as an artist. So I studied painting, then I studied art and technology. And so my orientation, which is just one, is not the right one, it's just me, is that, games are a form of culture. And I think that, my parents happened to be art educators. They were professors of art education, meaning that they worked with museums, they trained art teachers, they looked at, how art can be part of an educational context. And that's what's funny is that art education, it's not really a very sexy discipline, right? Like it's a sort of a musty old, feels sort of antiquated, training public school art teachers. But on the other hand, I actually find that art education, in some ways, has a lot to teach us in our thinking about serious games or games and learning or games and impact. Because I think what's interesting is that art educators don't, for example, look at, how by interacting with this artwork am I going to change the behavior of a viewer in a museum? Or how is this artwork going to inject information most efficiently into its audiences? Instead, art educators tend to see art as a context for exchange of ideas, for discussion, for people to get together. And I also love that in art education, there's a very blurry line between discussing art and analyzing art and making art, right? It is a sort of exactly that sort of trajectory that Sabiha just outlined for us. So I think so getting to the bigger question though, for me, so this idea of game as a context, and it's a little bit harkens to me what James G., this sort of wonderful scholar of games and learning and literacy, calls the big G game, right? It's not just about the actual text on the screen and the interaction that you're doing with it. It's really the whole context. Who you are, why you're there playing it, who are other people there around you, the whole situation. And for me, thinking about a learning situation, you're trying to make a game that has some kind of impact on someone. Maybe you're teaching them facts. Maybe you want to change their mind about an important issue. Maybe you want to just sort of impact them emotionally. But in a sense, that, let's call it educational or impact kind of situation, that itself is kind of a design problem, right? Then I think it, for example, the categories that Liz is talking about, how it is that you are leveraging a game inside a situation, right? Like, so a teacher doesn't have to say, well, this is an educational book or not an educational book, right? Books are sort of part of an educational situation or part of an impact situation, or the idea of narratives that Glenn was talking about. So for me, these all weave together. And yeah, there's a lot more to be said, but I guess I always want to sort of question, as some of you already did, the hard distinction between, serious games and not serious games, because for me, a game is a game is a game. If it's on the computer or off the computer, if you're focusing more on the intrinsic experience of the game or an extrinsic goal that you have for the players, if you really want it to be effective, you have to think about the audience and the context and what you want people to carry away from it. And I think that's true whether you're talking about something that's more ostensibly a serious game or not.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the analogy between fine arts and, for example, a fine arts class in school and students analyzing a painting. And it's not with the intention to, just as you say, change the behavior of students, but it's more contextual in that way. It's more so critique and awareness and analysis, not about changing behavior immediately.
Right. I actually think I'm very skeptical about gamification, or I want us to be skeptical. I think that idea of instrumentalizing games, like, oh, let's bring points and levels and rewards to an office or or a classroom or to, I don't know, some or a frequent flyer program, right? That oftentimes what happens is that I just think it needs to be designed very carefully, that you can sort of strip mine those surface elements from games and you leave the soul of play behind, right? The sort of like the kind of creative, mischievous, for me, the more deeply impactful ideas. And you can end up with very sort of superficially engaging works, but ones that aren't kind of fully leveraging games. And also that, anyway, I'm sorry, I'm about to start going off on a tangent. I'll stop there for now.
But if it's an interesting tangent, we're here for it. Yeah, so I
think I would like to add a little bit about that,
of course,
if I may. So, for example, I think Duolingo has managed to provide gamification that makes sense from my point of view, right? They take game aesthetics, they take the flow from games, and they really make it fun. Now, I would still argue that you could maybe create a real game that forces you to learn language, and that would still be more fun for me because, of exactly what you mentioned. But you need to give props to people that have done a well job, I think, applying some gamification approach. But I agree with you, most of them are just not really, it takes the soul out of games, I would agree.
I totally agree. I play Duolingo every day. Now in Italy, I've been, it's really helped my language. And Adrian Hahn, who has a wonderful book that just came out, mentions Duolingo also as a really positive example. So I agree. But in that case, the design is, I guess I'll put it this way. For me, every design implies a model of what it means to be human, right? So even this chair, I'm sitting in a chair now. There's a chair behind me. This chair implies a model of what it means to be human. I mean, on many levels, anatomically, materially, how, did it impact the environment? Economically, who is this for? What's the context? Is this a throne that makes me feel important? Is it more functional? What are the aesthetics of it?
Maybe it is, Eric.
Yeah, it hardly. This is an appropriate little, used, very modest chair for my throne. I guess my point is that games also imply a model of what it means to be human by virtue of their design. Like we are, in designing games, I know it seems like, hey, maybe we're just like, hey, trying to make a fun game or trying to make a good learning game, but you are implying a sort of a cognitive, a social, a political model of what it means to be human by virtue of creating something for an audience. And I think that when gamification goes wrong, it has that behaviorist kind of rat in the cage model of what it means to be human, right? Like, get this reward, push this button. And I would say that, Duolingo really does manage to thread that needle. I think it's wonderfully designed, and I think that it I don't want to say it transcends its mechanics, but I guess I would say that it seems to have the player's best interests at heart. Maybe put it that way, and it's very well designed on many levels.
It's very interesting that we mentioned Duolingo within this conversation about gamification in general. Duolingo was specifically mentioned as well during, I believe it was 2 years ago, we had a Game for Thought stream about dark design patterns. And on the other hand, design patterns within games that influence positive behavior. It was mentioned within that conversation, and I don't want to get too into the rabbit hole here about Duolingo, but do you ever get pictures of the owl crying or because you're not doing your lesson, and the owl is like deflating because he's sad because you're not completing your lesson. I think those are very interesting tactics that Duolingo uses to keep their player base as well. So maybe an interesting conversation to have there. But maybe for a future stream where we cover dark design patterns yet again. But interesting there. Duolingo is obviously a huge player in this space when it comes to gamification. I have a question specifically. It comes off of a conversation that I had with Glenn, actually, regarding the cultural aspects surrounding the space of serious games. And it's perfectly linked to a question that I received that reads, how does culture impact the adoption and effectiveness of serious games in different regions or communities? Are there specific cultural considerations that serious game developers should take into account? Now that we just had a conversation where kind of the line between a game and a serious game, it could be a bit blurred. I'm really interested to hear your takes regarding the cultural implications of the adoption of serious games within your different places of work across 3 different continents. But Glenn, I'd love to start with you.
Yeah, sure. Big question, big question, and I guess so many lenses that we can bring on that. But let me start where Eric kind of left off, and that is that it's really important that people see themselves in the world, and that sense that I can rebuild my culture. You know, Africa is not a country; it's 54 countries and made up of many regions and cultures, of course. And it has been stripped of many things through colonialism and beyond. But it's that sense of identity, that sense of purpose, I think, that is perhaps the highest order of what it is that we're trying to do in all forms of art. What makes a game interesting in not only my music and my culture and my art and my all of that stuff, the stuff that we can see, I think is also the stuff that we can't see. And often it's the innovative use of technology, for example. So in an African context, you know, we still struggle with low bandwidth environments, data and so on is important. So that's a cultural reality. It's an economic reality, but one that leads to incredible innovation. Africa is either going to be one of the biggest victims, for example, of climate change, or is going to be the source of many of its solutions. And that really is the fundamental purpose, and that is that can we give people a sense of agency? Can we through the power of games can we help people come to the realization that it's through their own actions that they can shape their cultures into the future? That again is a really important thing. Then we can get into the next tier around how games cut across literacy levels and cultures and age groups and so on. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions we have as an industry is that people think it's about 2 teenagers sitting in their underpants playing Fortnite. Apologies for those who are about to sit down for dinner.
It's not? But of course, oh my gosh. I better change my career. Whew.
And of course, the data, does not support that. We know everybody is a gamer. But yeah, so what I'm trying to say is that that's about archetype. That's about something that is pervasive and cuts across. It's that universal thing that we always try and tap into from a game design perspective. But maybe I'll conclude this because it is such an enormous question. Just by saying that dignity, the role that plays, games play in restoring dignity, the role that, for me, that agency does, Eric, trigger behavior change, because I think we're living in a world where it's important what people do, not only what they know. And I particularly, if we start to think about the Sustainable Development Goals or a world in crisis, as I like to say, that crisis means big, urgent, important, well, then we must also step into that fray and help actively shape that future. So, yeah, just some quick thoughts on it.
Yeah. And I thank you so much. And I wonder, because the original question read, how does culture impact the adoption and effectiveness of serious games in different regions and communities? But for Glenn, it seems for you, the question is the bigger question of just games in general and the power of games in general, not just serious games, but games that maybe could be interpreted in a way that is educational. So for the ecosystem in South Africa, for example, it's not so important that it's about the serious games elements, but the taboo surrounding games in general.
Absolutely. And I think, and absolutely, because that just goes back to the context question. The
Yeah,
stuff that
right,
I'm
right.
talking about is generally true. And so it's also true then in the serious gaming space. And yes, we are human centered and we need to keep that user at the center of our design processes. And so all that changes there really is the context, exactly as the rest of the panel has been talking about. So those will be as true when you make a learning game. Perhaps more so because, we've also got institutions, these sort of medieval institutions that we still live with, largely, and that we learn in and that we work in. And so again, and they are largely Western in their concept. So, there's another layer we could probably talk about, but then I definitely need to go and get my wine.
Oh yeah, hey, there's time for that. There's time for that. Thank you so much, Glenn. I think over to Elizabeth when we're talking about stigma surrounding but I did see, before I ask my question, I saw that you did maybe want to add something to what Glenn had to say. Yeah, go right ahead.
I think it's going in a similar track to what you are talking about. So one of the questions I often get is why games? And I also have to negotiate a lot of this stigma within the United States. A lot of the stigma seems to center, especially in the circles that I operate in DC, that games are seen as frivolous, that they're seen as a waste of time. There's the whole connotation of gaming culture that I have to navigate around. So even in a case where I ask a question of a group in our audiences of who plays games, there's a hesitancy to own up to that, even if it's playing the New York Times connections or Wordle, as maybe not seeing them as part of an active play. Then there's more the connotations, especially as for example, I was just in. Make games for not just US based audiences, but for international audiences. So I was recently demoing a game in Vietnam called The Plastic Pipeline, which you can find at plasticpipeline.wilsoncenter.org. It's a game about single-use plastics that I worked with our China Environment Forum to develop. And part of the intention was to develop this not just for US audiences, but also for Southeast Asian audiences. And we're doing some demos and some preliminary testing there. And I had a similar instance where asking students they voluntarily came to play a game, asking them if they played games. And again, a hesitancy because it's seen as a frivolous waste of time and not understanding that play is very much about how we as people learn and really engage and socialize in a lot of different ways. So one of the things that I would caution your students with is to just understanding that we are in this, we play games and we understand their value, and they're not necessarily wastes of time. Although I will get occasionally sucked into Zelda and lose track of time. But that they are seen as not necessarily this sort of universal space. And so we have to figure out how we can meet audiences where they are and really understanding how we can make and design these games for playful experiences to help leverage leverage that play. But I don't know if that was exactly what your question was going to be.
It actually was. So Lizzie read my mind. But I actually have a follow-up question for you as well. So you just said, and I'm a big believer of meeting people where they are, whether it's students, whether it's colleagues, whatever. Meet the person where they are. Working for the Wilson Center, working for a government institution, what has your experience been like? Meeting the people where they are within a governmental space, a more maybe political space where not everybody is super into the world of games and digital entertainment. What are some solutions that you can offer people in the audience that have to navigate these conversations with people on a somewhat regular basis that maybe they don't 100% understand the value of games and the positive that they can do?
Yeah, so I would say the first thing is everyone has played a game at some point in their life. So starting from that sort of a common ground is one. I also have to recognize that I'm coming from trailblazers have come before me in the White House and the executive branch. Department of Education funds a lot of game-based learning opportunities. And just that this is part of it. I'm, again, 20 years into the idea that we can use games and we can leverage them for some sort of positive impact. Within the federal sphere, I'm one of a couple of groups that develops and leverages games. So Department of State has also created a couple of games. Cat Park recently got an award at Games for Change, and State was supportive of that endeavor and that development for embassy usage across the world. And then there's a couple of other agencies like the Smithsonian, again, quasi, just like the Wilson Center. So when we're developing games, one of the things that I always think about is where is my audience starting from? And what is it that I want them to, not just like technologically, but also cognitively, where are they starting from in the topic that I'm developing a game for? It's one of the first questions before I even start thinking about what medium to use or what the format of the game is going to be. If I don't understand where the audience is coming from, or the people that I'm developing a game for, whether it's a small workshop game, a tabletop exercise, whether it's a broad scale digital game like our Fiscal Ship, which is about the US federal budget. I jokingly say that only in DC would that be something that we go, yes, that would be super fun to play with, is the federal budget. But we've had about 4 million people play that worldwide. But in any case, if it's a small tabletop exercise, broad scale digital, where are they starting from and how can I support them learning a little bit more or motivating them to learn a little bit more? A lot of my ethos isn't that within a 15-minute game, I'm going to get you to learn a deep, as much as you could from reading a book in that timeline. You're not going to train someone in that timeline, but I can motivate them and make something that's really wonky and really hard to understand a little bit more appetizing, a little bit more fun to engage with. It's really more of this idea of motivating players after they've played the experience, increasing their agency or their self-efficacy around the topic area, really trying to make sure that they feel like they can have a part in those conversations. So if you play the Fiscal Ship for 15 minutes, how is it that I can really get you to be a little less scared of maybe going on and learning more about the federal budget as a part of that? When it comes to across the lines of politics, as it were, one of the things is that we're nonpartisan. One of the benefits of games is that you can write your own story. So in our games, we put the tools in your hands. We don't prescribe any particular output. We let you play with policies, and however you want to map them is up to you. We're not telling you how to do it. And that's honestly one of the benefits of games, is that they're an interactive device. They're an interactive storytelling device So you get to tell us what the story you want to pave is. And as long as you meet the end of goals, like for fiscal ship, it's decreasing national debt and whatever goals you set, then that's it. That we're not prescribing anything, but you're really the author of your own tale there.
The
Sorry.
fiscal ship. The fiscal ship. I think that's amazing that exists. Wow. Good thing that we're here chatting. The fiscal ship. Anyone who's interested. Also, I'm fully open to everybody plugging their own projects. So if anybody has anything to plug at the end of the stream, shamelessly go right ahead. But I wanted to ask about collaboration as well. I'm sure that a lot of collaboration efforts went behind, for example, we're just now talking about the fiscal ship. We talked in the beginning about how important it is to involve experts in these subject matters regarding whatever kind of topic this serious game is surrounding. The crucial element of involving conversations with experts. And I want to ask about good collaboration between many different individuals from many different spaces. For example, you have a game developer, you have people from for example, like Sabiha, you were talking about the wetlands game, the wetlands project. You have environmental scientists, I'm sure, that are involved in that project. So I can imagine it's a lot of communication that needs to be involved. And I'm wondering what makes good collaboration between people from different sectors. Have you seen this go well in your experience? Have you seen this not go so well in your careers? And because some of the best lessons are from when things don't go so well. What have you to say about collaboration? Sabiha, I think you wanted to jump in.
Sure.
Or
Sure,
maybe I just imagined that, but go right ahead.
So I think I have two examples. One where it worked very well. I've already talked about that a little bit in the Natural History Museum, right? It was just a sense of involving them and the facts into the gameplay. The other one, which was a little bit more difficult, was the one in the Arts Museum. Now, the curators of traditional arts, for example, if you look at Bauhaus artists, there are a lot of them exhibited in the State Museum called Staatsgalerie here in Stuttgart. And the curators are there to represent the artists, specifically, for example, if they're no longer alive. Now, if you take that art and you digitalize it or you put it into a digital environment, you're juxtaposing it to different interpretation, which might be, okay for the curator, or it might not be. And that's something that I certainly underestimated. In some areas, it worked a lot. So, for example, we've done one concept where we took the costumes from Schlemmer, the Bauhaus artists. They're very far out, very great looking, strange, best costumes ever that you could also put into a game. And we could digitalize that because the artist in itself said that he never wanted it to be exhibited statically. So to get it to move and to create a playful interaction with that was a non-brainer, because the creator immediately said yes, because of the fact that the artist never wanted it to be exhibited statically, right? But if you take other art and you just put it into a game without really thinking about what it will be if you juxtapose it to different areas, can be a challenge. And I think that's one thing that I find very important to start with from the beginning. And that's also a little bit what Liz says, right? Take them from where they are. So enable them to experiment with you is crucial. If they've never done anything with games in a museum, give them the space to experiment with you, the safety to try out things, and then to co-design it with you. I think for me, in the serious gaming area, it really is a co-creation process that you need to create with the experts. Sometimes it's even a co-creation or participatory design approach that you take with the people who are using it. So, for example, I've created content for schools where I actually went into the school with 16-year-old pupils and I sat down with them and I looked into what are their worries, what are their metaphors, what are the games that they actually do play in order to get them to where they come from, right? I think there are different methods that we need to apply to pull the people in. And if I may, I would also like to say something to Glenn. I think you mentioned something really important, and that is to make sure that you're projecting the real people. And I think we need to be a little bit careful with stereotypes. I think the more games are being produced, specifically the more games may be produced also with artificial intelligence engines, the more stereotypes are being presented. And I don't mind students using the tools as long as they tell me that they have used them, and as long as they don't claim it's their art, right? But I think it's something we need to be careful of, because if we have too many stereotypes in games and people don't see themselves in the games, that's an issue that I think that we need to we need to address, not just as game designers but as a society also. But I hope I answered your question.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Thank you so much, Sabiha. Yeah, it definitely some really tangible examples there of in which ways collaboration goes well. And you mentioned something really important: co-collaboration together with a curator, and not one person making the game and saying,
Exactly.
"Ta-da! Here's the thing that you wanted to be in a game," and I just kind of made it on my own terms. Liz, you I think wanted to add something as well. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief, but I really like this thread of, it seems very obvious, but if you're going to create a game that highlights a cultural group, is engaging with a particular topic, let's say mental health, or in our case, policy research, talk to the people and incorporate the people who are involved in those conversations already as part of the design process. Just because you're a designer doesn't mean that you have to go lone wolf over here and not engage with those communities. In fact, some of the best games that I've played recently really dive deeply into those communities or amplify marginalized voices by working very closely with those communities. I can think of several that are examples from both Games for Change New York. Glenn, you probably have more examples from your recent conference. Most of my engagement is with policy researchers, and educators. So you really want to, if you're designing for a classroom, again, not radical here, but talk to teachers who are going to be implementing your game to make sure that it is something that they need. Potentially talk to their students to make sure that the design of your characters resonates with them, for example. With the plastic pipeline game that we just developed, it took us several rounds of revising those characters for college students because we didn't quite get the aesthetic right. So just making sure that you're talking to people and incorporating them consistently throughout the design process as advisors is a good model.
Yeah. Thank you very much for those insights. I just want to say also to those of you who are watching live on Twitch at the moment, I just posted in the chat that I would love to open it up for you all also to ask your own questions. If anything is burning in your mind, now is the time to write that question in the Twitch chat with a Q beforehand. Yes, I see from Holy Deadpool 29. Hello there. The question reads, what serious games are your favorite games that you would recommend? So any good practice examples that are really inspiring? Glenn, hello there.
On the basis of shameful plugging, so we do it.
I love shameful plugging.
No, it's not that. Don't worry, it's not that embarrassing. It'll be fine. We do a lot of work with financial institutions around financial inclusion, entrepreneurship, all of these kinds of things. And as we know, that also ties back to the SDGs, which I keep referencing as a good framework for us to think about the impact we want to have in the world. And this was a big bank, and they phoned us and they said, no, they need a metaverse strategy. And I'm like, okay, everybody calm down. Can we just start talking about what we mean by the metaverse and so on. Anyway, the process went really well, and we designed a tycoon game in Roblox. Now, that would be obvious to us that the mechanic is really good at teaching delayed gratification and resource management and all of those kinds of things, which are actually really key to that, to locking in those understandings and that shift in behavior. But if you think about it, nobody really wakes up in the morning wanting to learn about budgeting or, I mean, not even the people in the bank get excited about those kinds of things. It's just not the way we are. And yet, and by the way, we themed this with, oh, sorry, we are having what's called load shedding in South Africa. So I'm still live,
Oh,
but it's rolling blackouts. Don't worry, we'll be fine. So yeah, I'll just finish the thought briefly, and so what we reflected a lot of South African cultural foods in this game. I mean, they've had an unprecedented response. The game's called Chinatown. It's playable by anybody out there. Um, Kids are absolutely loving it. They're phoning in and mailing into the bank to say, how do I open up bank accounts? How do I do these kinds of things? The parents are amazed because they're just grateful for the bank. We're giving them little cheat sheets on the side for conversation starters around things like, pocket money and how those kinds of things work. And of course, the bank is completely thrilled. And, so it's just, again, about this point about putting your users in the center of that experience. Each of those are different users: the parents, the bank, or the clients, even the people at Roblox. And I'll just finish off with this last thought, maybe, about the collaboration thing again. I don't know of another single field of human endeavor that brings together so many different disciplines. It cuts across absolutely everything from a creative, technical, production, business perspective. I think it really brings together the best of each of the fields of discipline, plus, of course, the subject matter experts in in whatever area it is. So anyway, so that's me in the semi-dark, but you see, Africa, we
I
will
have to say,
rise, we
Glenn,
will overcome.
I'm so impressed by how quick you just improvised that. Am I the only one who was so impressed by that? It was
totally.
the fastest improvisation I have ever seen.
I mean, and I'm
Great.
using my phone as a light.
It's perfect. I mean, hey, it does the job. We can see you, we can hear you. It's perfect.
It's absolutely.
Thanks so much, Glenn.
We will overcome.
We will improvise, adapt, and overcome. We shall. We shall. Eric, your research really is seemingly endless. It is so impressive the amount of research that you've done regarding these topics, and I'm sure along with that research, you've seen a lot of serious games in your days, and I'd love to see from your side if there's any that really stand out as very impressive.
Oh gosh, that's so interesting because when you mentioned that, what are the serious games that you would point to? I think about my own childhood and the games I think that impacted me the most. And I think that, yeah, there's a lot that I could point to from the neighborhood games that I played, the folk games like Kick the Can and Ghost in the Graveyard and Dodgeball with kids in my neighborhood. Early computer games like, the first edition of Sin City, for example, that really kind of lets you play around with systems and understand how cause and effect work. But I would say maybe a game that I would really have to point to as like a serious game where I really, really taught me so much as a game like Dungeons and Dragons, for example. Not only did my friends and I in fifth grade, we kind of like figured out what a bell curve was on our own by trying to figure out, oh, when you roll 3 6-sided dice for strength and intelligence and wisdom, what are the chances of getting, the best and the worst and the medium? And we sort of graphed it out. And, from that sort of mathematics and probability to the sort of performative aspects of it, the acting and role playing, to the creative parts like building worlds, telling stories, drawing out your character. So I just think that there's and to the psychological aspects of the game, which is that, when you're role playing, you sort of take on an identity, and part of that identity is aspirational and positive, and part of it is, the transgressive identity that maybe you couldn't take on in the real world. And it's some kind of wonderful you know, childhood mix of those things when you're playing a game like Dungeons and Dragons. So I would just say, for me, a game like that has all of the seeds that we're really trying to. I think in now that we're all sort of making games that try and have an impact, those games did it without necessarily intending to. Although I guess in the case of
Exactly.
SimCity, it was really more of a simulation along the lines that Sabiha is talking about when she's talking about making sure you get your facts right.
It's really interesting that you mentioned SimCity. I also, when I think about games that really impacted me in a way that I didn't consciously realize until many, many years later, that is one of them. Really, The Sims in general is just very interesting. It just, even your basic human needs, such as hygiene and needing to eat every hours, or else your meter will turn to orange and then red and then whatever. But it's interesting how these games really have this effect on us many years later, sometimes in a way that a serious game would. But the games themselves weren't set out originally maybe to be educational. And that's what's really interesting, is that maybe it's part of the story here is about, a big part is about impact.
Right.
And maybe not necessarily about intention. I don't know.
Well, no, don't get me wrong. I don't want to say that games can't be designed with an impact. I think one of the interesting things about this conversation, and sort of why we're kind of straying back and forth, is that normally when we often talk about games, we're talking about what makes a game fun, is sort of the stuff inside the game, how you design an interface well, how does it make money, how is the production process going to work. But when we have a conversation about serious games, we're not talking about what's inside the game, but how the game relates to the outside world. And in a sense, that's kind of what all of us have been talking about, right? Like how a game relates to its context. I think, and we're all kind of all talking about that in different ways. I love the way that Glenn talked about how, in a game you sort of see yourself, hopefully not as a stereotype as Sabiha mentioned. But to me, so for me, thinking about serious games, it's almost like a frame or a lens that we can put on ourselves as players, or as designers, or as educators, or people that want to change the world in some way. And it's really about kind of shifting that emphasis and seeing games as a form of culture that can have a powerful impact. And I would say, if I can take a few minutes, I know we're getting near the end of time, but I would say that
Hey, it's okay. The stream will not automatically shut down at 9:15.
I do think that, and this touches on some of your earlier questions, but I do think that there is something interesting and special about games today, and I think that there's a sense in which our world is increasingly sort of interconnected, and technologies of complexity and information are impacting our lives in terms of how we interact with each other, how we learn and work and socialize and romance and do our finances and connect with our governments, and all of these different ways of our lives are kind of like completely intertwined with complex modular networks of information. And games, while they are ancient, right? Games are, we know there are tabletop games like Senet that are, thousands of years old, the Mancala games from Africa, the, Parcheesi family and Go, and the King's Game from Scandinavia. So there's ancient games that are millennia old. But even though games are an ancient form of human expression, they are in some ways a cultural form, which has, I think, a particularly interesting relationship to these ideas of cause and effect, of systems, of modularity. In other words, every time we play a game like tennis or chess or the Roblox financial sim that Glenn was talking about, we are exploring cause and effect, right? We are kind of pushing and pulling at the inputs and outputs of a system, and there's something very special about that. And I think that this is in part why games, sort of have risen at the end of the 20th century, now in the 21st century, as a sort of like becoming a dominant form of mass culture in a way that they weren't earlier. And I think that even other forms of culture, like the moving image, is becoming more game-like, right? That we stream and mix and remix, and that we're blurring the lines between designers and players. Anyway, where am I going with this? I think that this is a really important way of thinking about games, and I think it's an important way of thinking about the relevance of games to the world in which we live. And that for me, harnessing the potential impact of games is in part about recognizing their relevance and relationship to their context. And I think that there are interesting ways that games are particularly preparing us to, as Sabiha said, analyze systems, but also to kind of deconstruct them and reconstruct them and modify them and turn them into something new. And so I think these ways of thinking, which have to do with solving the wicked problems of our times, games can play a part in that conversation. I don't think that playing a game will solve the problem, but I think often games can help us help engender the ways of thinking, the ways of collaborating, the ways of understanding the world, the ways of relating to technology, for example, that are the things that these problems need. And lastly, I'll just say that I just want to also, in terms of relating to the outside context, that it often goes beyond the game itself, that thinking about the impact of just playing games too. There's a really interesting work that Ben Abraham is doing on the impact, the climate impact of video games, right? Thinking about, again, how games relate to their context. And I've been part of a group that's doing the same thing with tabletop games and publishing a best practices game for tabletop manufacturing and publishing and design and distribution. So I just want to say that this is kind of happening on all levels, right? That I guess I'm trying to speak to the audience and saying, okay, there are these educational games. Maybe they're not for me. It's not what I want. But it's really more a way of thinking about how games relate to the world. And if you love games and you're a fan of games and you want games to be impactful and you want games to sort of be part of the kind of mythology of important cultural forms, I think that all of this kind of comes along with that.
I honestly think that Eric was like a perfect synopsis of the the greater context in which games exist and in which we exist, and how those two combine to make something very interesting. I really have to thank you all so much. I want to do a speed round, like a lightning round of a couple questions here, just for a couple minutes. I see a question from Frederick Alonzo. Do you think maybe in the space of serious games here, PC games are becoming more important than console games in the future? Maybe a show of hands. Who here thinks that PC games are necessarily becoming more important versus console games?
That's not so easy to answer, sorry. PC games you can play in a classroom. Therefore, I would go half a hand up. Because you can play them in a classroom and you can't play console games in a classroom.
Yeah, so like mid-hand.
Sorry, Glenn.
Yeah, mid-hand.
Mobile first, man. A mobile first.
I would say in general that we're seeing mobile, VR, but also board games are really having a resurgence. So my game that I was going to point to, if I had to pick one game, the game that got me through COVID is Wingspan, and it was designed to help you learn about birds, of all things. So
who doesn't love birds? Yeah. I love birds. Awesome. Thank you. Next speed round question. Do you have any books to suggest about the topics of game design and applied games? If anyone has a name of a book that really impacted them, feel free to share it. If not, our lovely panelists here could email me or communicate this with me, and I can put it in the YouTube description as well once I post this live stream on YouTube tomorrow. Of you four, any games that really, any books, that really stick out to mind in terms of game design and applied games?
Rules of Play, one of the books. And the other one, from my perspective, would be a game of lenses.
Okay,
These are
so
the two
rules of
main.
play, rules of play, game of lenses. According to Sabiha, very, very impactful books there. Last speed round question. With a serious game, which do you think has more impact, the graphics or the story? Like for Zelda, for example, it's the story that makes it such a popular game, or the graphics. For me, it would be the story that would have more impact. What would you think? So the discussion of graphics versus story, what has more impact for specifically a serious game?
Say that with. Sorry, go ahead, Glenn.
You and Glenn, you can do rock, paper,
I'm
scissors,
sorry,
shoot.
go ahead. Forgive me.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, everybody's on their own hero's journey. And so, unless we understand that it is all about narrative, it's all about how do I see myself, how am I going to shape my story in the game world or the real world. So I say narrative is what humans do. Everything else comes second, but that's just an opinion.
All right. Liz, last thought. Go right ahead. You're more than welcome.
I was going to say that narrative and art can both transport you. So, but with a lot of serious games, there's an interest in narrative, largely because it's something that we can easily invest in. We're natural storytellers, but I've seen a lot more games that are also investing in the graphics. So like Gris is one that looked at depression and grieving that was really popular at Games for Change a few years ago. So both, not easy.
That
If I may add, just really quickly, visual storytelling is also possible and real in games.
Yeah.
Very, very, very true. Thank you so much. This was an absolutely wonderful discussion. I had so much fun. I hope you did too. Eric, Glenn, Liz, and Sabiha, it's been such a pleasure to have you. I wish you wonderful holiday season wherever you find yourself in the world, and a beautiful new year. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share your very valuable insights regarding the world of serious games. Thank you so much. For those of you in the audience, hang tight just a minute longer. I'll share some information about the future of Game for Thought in 2024. So hang tight and we'll be right back. And just like that, another Game for Thought live stream is in the books. And it was the final one of 2023. I cannot believe it. But I'm ready for a new year full of Game for Thought streams and really impactful discussions about ethically relevant topics in games and digital entertainment. I first of all would really love to thank our panelists for this evening. Thank you to Glenn, Liz, Eric, and Sabiha for your invaluable insights. A big thank you to our tech master, Casper, as always. couldn't do it without you. To our moderators for this evening, Rico and Bradley, many thanks for helping us out here. Thank you so much to Hoest and Hoest DIE for making this possible, the Flemish Audiovisueel Fund, the Flemish Games Association, and Elevate for powering the technology behind the stream. I want to share with you the upcoming schedule for 2024. We'll take a brief hiatus during the month of January while our students are busy tackling and doing great on their exams. But we will be back in February 21st, with the topic of neurodiversity in games. So you can already mark your calendars for the 21st of February. And other than that, I really wish you all a happy holiday, very happy new year, and let's continue to discuss these important topics throughout 2024. Thank you very much for joining. Have a wonderful evening. And this was Game for Thought, Games for Good Beyond Entertainment. Thank you so much. Happy New Year, happy holidays, and see you next time. Bye-bye.